Hello. Hi, I'll wait a bit before I continue to give others time to join as well, if you don't mind. Okay. Hello, everyone. Hello, Vivian. Oh, I'm glad you were able to see the invitation now. Okay, so let's see. I'll start. So today I'm going to show two ways actually of how you can paint with watercolor. One is with an actual egg. So it's already empty. I've punctured it and removed the egg inside. So just make sure, of course, to wash it as well so that it won't stink up later on. So anyway, you can of course make a smaller hole, and then just let it dry or wipe it dry, and then you can use watercolor ground. So I have this small um, ground from Daniel Smith. There are other brands, so just have a look around. Um, you can buy watercolor ground, and it actually also comes in different variations. Some come with a tint of colors, some have different textures. Like, for example, if you want to imitate rough watercolor paper, they also have that. But this is just a regular watercolor ground that's titanium white. So just, just regular one. So the nice thing about having watercolor ground is you can actually use this to experiment, so that you can use your watercolor not just on watercolor paper, but on canvas, on other surfaces, glass, um, anything really that you can think of. Just if it's a glossy surface, just sand it down, or just remove the smooth texture so that the watercolor ground that you apply will stick to the surface and won't slide off. But so far I've tried this on canvas, and it's been awesome. Of course, it's not exactly the same effect that you would get if you would use your watercolor on watercolor paper, but it's fun to experiment with because you can use it on other surfaces besides watercolor paper, and you can have fun, really. So um, it's up to you. Maybe you can use 2 to 3 layers if you want it to be really thick. I know, right? I actually just used this last year. So I just fairly recently used this. So it's fun. It's something new. So if, for example, you like the texture of canvas, but you want to use watercolor, then this is awesome. Okay, so we'll start with that. We'll start with painting on an actual egg, and we'll also paint eggs on paper. So let's start with an actual egg. I'm going to flip down the camera now so you'll see my desk. Okay, let me just put this down. All right, so I'm gonna flip it around. Okay, there you go. And let me just add light. Okay, there. So what you do is first you apply your watercolor ground. Try to use brushes that you're not that are not precious to you, so that you can just apply it without worrying about damaging your bristles. So don't use your nice brushes. Just use your cheaper brushes or brushes that you would use to create texture and stuff like that. Okay, it's just like when you're applying gesso for oil or acrylic. You don't want to use your nice brushes for that. Okay, so you just wet your brush, whatever brush you choose. Of course, flat brushes would be great for applying on a bigger surface area. So what I do is I will just actually squeeze it out here. Of course, you can squeeze it out on a palette if you want more control. So not too wet, just a damp brush, and just spread it around. What I do is I would paint first the upper half, or you can do half like this or half like that, up to you. So I would just paint the upper half first so that I have a place to hold. Okay, so this is just like applying gesso to a surface to prep it for oil or acrylic use. So in this case, you're applying watercolor ground so that your watercolor has a surface to cling to when you apply it. Because if you paint it here, it will just slide off. There's nothing to stick to and nothing to absorb. So what the watercolor ground gives it a surface that will absorb your watercolor, so it stays in place. Okay, so as you can see, the first layer, you can still see the brown egg underneath. But if you're already happy with that, you can try that out as well. But in my case, I will do two layers of this. Okay, so first layer, it doesn't have to be perfect. Just apply all over. Okay, and once I have that down, I'm just going to set it aside. You can use your blow dryer to hasten the drying time if you want, or you can just wait for it to dry if you're not in a hurry anyway, or if you're gonna do several eggs, then you can just move from one egg to the next. So no worries. So what I do is I just put it in a pen and then just put it in a jar like so that I don't damage it. Okay, so leave it to the side to dry. Okay, so while we're waiting for it to dry, because I just prepared one egg since I only have a smaller watercolor ground, but it's a fun exercise. Who would have thought, right, that you can use watercolor not just on paper. Okay, so while we're waiting for that to dry, let's go to our watercolor on paper. Okay, so our eggs on paper. So here I've pre-drawn one egg because this is the more complicated one. Okay, so I've sketched it beforehand. As you can see, there's a pattern, so I will still erase some lines. So what I did with this is I started with a smaller circle in the middle, then I added the bigger circle because I used it as a guide for these details. Okay, and then you can always erase it after. So having these two circles as guide will help you create a more symmetrical design if that's what you're aiming for. So here I created the design. So if you want this design, I can create this sketch on digital form and then share it with you guys tomorrow. Okay, so but this one now is I sketched this freehand, but I can also provide you the sketch of this design if you want, so that you can just print it out and then trace over it or use it as a guide or whatever. Okay. Okay, so I just erased all the unnecessary lines, the guidelines basically, so that it doesn't stay there once I cover this with watercolor. Okay, so you always have to erase the lines so that they won't remain there after you use your watercolor, because it's really impossible to remove it later on. Okay, so here are my eggs. So just one very detailed one at the center, and then two other ones that will be more loose and relaxed. Okay, so for this one in the center, here's where I'll be using the masking fluid. Okay, so what I do with this is I just pour a little bit on my um, container here so that it doesn't dry, so the whole bottle doesn't get exposed to the air and, you know, creates a film and dries up. At least little by little, it's not so wasteful. Okay, so I have watercolor ground, masking fluid, sorry, right here. And what I do with this is I use a color shaper. That's what it's called, to apply the masking fluid. You can use a brush, of course. If you're going to use your brush, don't use your expensive brushes. And then you can coat your brush. For example, if you're using a brush like this, you can coat this with a brush cleaner, for example, before you use it for your masking fluid. That way, later on, when you need to clean, you just rinse it and your bristles aren't ruined. Okay, so here is the masking fluid. So I like to use the color shaper because it's silicone, so it's very forgiving. Even if the masking fluid dries up here while I'm applying it, I just remove it with my hand and I just keep applying it. Okay, so let me just zoom in even further so you can see it up close. Okay, so let me just free my space. Okay, so I just dip my color shaper and then use it to apply the design. So this is an angled color shaper, so it's very helpful to get into those tiny details. So have you guys tried to use color shapers? Usually I would use this in acrylic when I'm painting in acrylic, but I find that it's also perfect for applying masking fluid, which is awesome. Some people, I think, like to use the glass pens and such, but this one is, I really recommend this one. Oh, this is from our verbena set, which will be available soon. Okay, so just covering the design. So this is my favorite trick to use when I'm doing detailed work. I just use masking fluid to cover it up so that I don't have to paint around it, painstakingly paint around it. So it gives me more freedom to apply watercolor around the design without worrying that it will be covered. Okay, so once you apply your design, just make sure you don't go overboard, because it will be harder to remove for corrections. So just take your time when you're doing this, especially when you're working with more detailed designs. So this is also perfect for those highlights, for example, in your works that are a sharp white. So you can use masking fluid for that to preserve the white. Okay. So how are you guys? Are you celebrating the Easter holiday. I love it because growing up we would paint eggs. The entire family would spend the morning painting eggs, and we would end up with different kinds of designs. It's really fantastic what each of us come up with. Okay. So I'm not really aiming for perfection, just as long as I get the general design, the spacing in between, as long as I get those, I'm happy. So this is just a design that I created right before this painting session. So this is fun. This is the one thing that I like about painting Easter eggs. You can just do whatever with your designs. Yes, so now you can use it. Well, normally when I use this for acrylic, it's for creating texture. When I apply paint, and then I use this to create texture and also to apply other paints on top of the previous color to create different kinds of textures. So it's also useful for that, but I've found that it's very, very useful for this. I really have more control applying, and you don't worry about the masking fluid drying up on it and ruining it because it's silicone. You just literally peel it off. Okay, so almost there. So just really take your time when doing your design. So here I prepared 3 eggs, and I put the detailed one on the center so that it's there. It's not on the side where it's gonna feel heavy because it's so detailed. So at the center, it ensures that the whole composition will be balanced later on. Okay, so just move around your paper, so twist it around if needed. If it's small paper, then it's pretty easy to do that. So just be careful that you don't smudge areas that you've already covered. Okay, so as you can see, it's very detailed, but you can cover it in a short amount of time fairly easily. And it's really worth the effort because if you want your design to remain crisp and white, then it really is perfect. Okay, so once I've done with this, I'm going to go back to the actual egg, the real egg, and apply our following layers. Okay, so let's go to our egg. Let's set this aside. Okay, so I would cover this with anything really, just so that it doesn't dry up while it's sitting. But that's what I do with masking fluid. I don't dip from on the entire bottle, because while you're going back and forth dipping, the liquid is exposed to the air, and um, it will ruin your masking fluid too soon. So just pour a small amount, and then you can always add more if you need later. Okay, so here you can already see that it's starting to dry here and there. So just set it aside. We'll leave this for last. So when you apply your masking fluid, make sure that it's really dry before you paint around it so it doesn't cause any bad effects. Okay, so let's go back to the egg. Okay, the ground dries fairly easily, and when I'm in a hurry, I do use a blow dryer. Okay, so back to my ground. Just again, damp brush, flat brushes if you have, because they're makes it much easier to spread your ground all over. Okay, so try to make a smaller hole than mine if you can, so that it won't be so big and so visible. In my case, I'll just put this in a bunch and try to place it in a way that the cracks aren't visible. Or you can always cover it with some paper mache right here before you do this. So you can do that too. Okay, so the first layer, you still see some of the brown of the egg, but it's good to have 2 layers because it will have enough grounding for the watercolor to stick to later. Okay, so I'll use a blow dryer just so that we can quicken this session. Okay, so let's twist it around, go back to the top. Okay, so just 2 layers I think would be enough. I'm not going to create a too thick watercolor painting on it anyway, so no need to make it so thick. But I really recommend that you try out using Watercolor Ground. I have an article about this. I'll share it also in the event so that you guys can check it out, see the difference, because I used Watercolor Ground on canvas and then also on cold pressed paper and hot pressed paper, and so you can see the difference. Okay, so I'm also gonna again use my blow dryer just to hasten it. Okay, and now I can go to the other side and apply another layer. So I think this would be even better if you create several. That way you can just go around and paint all your eggs, and by the time you go back to your first one, it's dry. So this is a wonderful discovery, Watercolor Ground, and I really recommend that you also try it out, because at least you can use it on so many different surfaces. So you get to use watercolor and create the watercolor effect, not just on paper, which is awesome. Of course, there's a very slight difference effect-wise, but really it's fun, especially if you love to paint in watercolor so much. And now you can get to paint on anything. Like now you can get to use it on your eggs. Okay, one last go at the blow dryer. Okay, that's hot. Okay, so now let's go and use some watercolor on them, on this egg. Okay, so just don't forget to rinse your brush, the one that you used watercolor ground on, so that it won't dry up on your brush. Okay. All right, so once you have that, make sure it's very dry. So if you're sure that it's dry, then you can already paint on it. Okay. Let's start with choosing our palette. Okay, I'll use the Moderna palette. So it has modern colors, basically. You have your bright red, your opera pink, your purple, turquoise blue. Of course, you have your basic colors here as well. But it's really, well, it's Moderna, so it's really curated to carry the modern colors. Okay, so I'll use the opera pink. I'm going to paint some roses here, or well, any flower really. It doesn't have to represent any specific flower. You don't have to if you're not in the mood for that. So I'll go for a smaller round brush. This is a number 5. Okay. And then okay, there you go. I'm just going to paint directly. I'm not going to sketch anymore. So this will be a more loose painting style. So what I'll do is I'll just dip directly here. Again, you always have your scratch paper so that you can test your colors out on it. Test your mixture, test your saturation, if it's dark enough or not. Okay, so I'm going to start with 2 C's like this. And then go around, overlapping the previous petal. Okay, then I'm going to add water to lighten the next petals. So tip, press, and then lift. Tip, press, and then lift. So just keep repeating, making the petals bigger and bigger as they move outwards. If it's too light, you can always go over them if you feel like they need more depth. Okay, so I have a rose here. I'm just going to add little bits, just add some depth. Add a damp, use my damp brush over some areas to soften them. Okay, and here is my rose on this egg. So it does look like a watercolor, right? And you did it on an actual egg, which is awesome. Okay, so this is opera rose. So it's a really opera pink. So it's a really bright pink that's perfect for floral paints. And you can always tone it down with a little green or blue. All right, so let's create some more roses here and there. You can also plant it around if you want. So I'm going to paint up here. So starting with a more concentrated mix for the inner part. So 2 small C's, like so. And then start your overlapping petals. So again, tip, press, and then go back to the tip, lifting. Okay. And as you move outwards, even if you don't add water, it's already going to start to become lighter because, well, it's running out of pigment. And then at some point I will add water to my brush to further lighten it. Again, you can always go over those parts if you feel like you made it too light. Okay, so I have right now 2 roses. Again, you can always just dab more color on the petals if you feel like you need to add volume, add shadows to the inner parts of the petals. Just go ahead and dip. Okay, and now I'm just going to add a bit of water here and there. Okay, so far I have 2 flowers. Then I'll add one more here. Okay, so it absorbs very quickly. So that's the thing with watercolor ground. But it also is quite easy to lift off the paint. So if, for example, you made a mistake or you want to make corrections, it's very easy to do it on watercolor ground. Because it does absorb, but it doesn't absorb as much as a paper would. So the paint still tends to sit more on top, and some of it absorbed under, but a lot on top. Okay, so again, for the last rose, with a more concentrated pink, 2 C's, then start with the overlapping. So just very repetitive, and petals getting bigger as it moves outwards. So I'm going to add water to my mixture and continue the tip, press, and then lift, tip, press, and then lift. Okay, so just make sure that the petals keep overlapping on top of each other, as how you would see on an actual rose. And again, I'm just going over the parts that I feel are too light, adding more pigment to the inner part of the petals where it would be shadowed. Okay, I'm going to add another pass around. All right, so all my roses are done, and now it's time for you to add some greenery if you want, or you can just fill this up with roses if you want to. So different ways of doing it, up to you, or you can just create a background color. Really, it's up to you what you like to add to it if you want. I just want to create an egg with flower design because it's very perfect for spring. Okay, so I will mix some green. I'll use phthalo green, and then add some new gamboge to it. Okay, so again, you can just test out your colors first if you feel like it's a color that you don't like. So maybe I'll add another color to it. I'll get from the Classico. No. Let me just get another set. Okay. So from the Vista, I'm going to get some yellow ochre. Okay. So that I can create a more subdued green, I'm going to mix some yellow ochre. Okay. And I prefer this. Okay, so you can see the difference. So this is phthalo green with new gamboge, so it's a much brighter green. And I added yellow ochre to this mixture, and it became this kind of green, more muted kind of green I'm looking for. Okay, so again, up to you, depending on your preference. Okay, so I'm going to add leaves here and there. Just really framing around the flowers. So feel free to add vines and other greenery that you prefer. Okay, so I like this green. It gives it a more vintage feel. Just perfect for backdrop greenery on the roses, so that they won't take the attention from flowers. Oops. So when I'm working on watercolor ground, I'm not so worried about mistakes because like I mentioned earlier, it's quite easy to lift the paint off. So I suggest you try it out so you can see for yourself. Okay, I'm just going to add the greenery all around. Okay, some a bit smaller to also vary the design. And for now, I think this is okay. Okay, so later on you can always take a look again and see if you'd like to add more. Again, up to you. So for example, this area seems empty, so I'm just going to add a tendril here. Okay, so again, up to you to add the little details that you like, but really it's fun to be able to paint on eggs and have this look. Generally, you would use acrylic or poster paints or gouache, right? But it's also possible to paint on eggs with watercolor. All you need is watercolor ground. Okay, so now let's move on to the actual eggs on paper. Okay, let's bring my pad back. Okay, so I used paper from Zen Art as well. This is a watercolor block, but this block is glued on two sides instead of all four sides. So in this case, it's here on the left and right. Okay, so here is my design. Earlier I applied masking fluid over the whole design and I set it aside to give it time to dry. So now it's dry enough and I can apply my color. So I'm going to choose the colors that I'm using. So I'm going to go for red. Okay, something bright and cheerful. I'm going to use Pearl Red right here. And since I have a very detailed design already, I don't need to do so much. I'm just going to wet the whole egg with the water. Okay, make sure you get in between the design. Okay, so wet it enough. If you have nice paper, it can take more water. So make sure that you have a glossy surface and just tilt it and just look at it from an angle and you will see. So I'm just going here and there just to make sure everything is wet enough. Okay, and now I'm going to use some Pearl Red right here. So just preparing. So it's a really nice vibrant red. like a mid-red. That's what it looks like swatched out. Okay. It's a Christmassy kind of red. Okay, and then I'm just going to apply it here and there. So again, makes it so much easier. I don't have to paint around the design because it will be preserved by the masking fluid. Right now it actually looks cool already against the masking fluid, but it will be even better once we remove that later on and we reveal the white of the paper. So do you guys like to use the masking fluid? I don't often use it, but I find it very useful for very detailed designs. Okay, so just make sure that you keep the shape of your egg as much as you can. And then you can always add another layer later on if you want the red to be really very dark. In my case, I'm just adding extra pigment here and there, especially along the center of the design. I want it to be really extra dark value-wise. Okay. So just leave it to dry, and then you can always add another layer if you want to later on. Okay, but leave it to dry before you do any peeling. Oh, you have masking fluid. It's really fun for you can really start out with something as basic as this, create a very intricate design, and then have fun painting around it. Like you don't have to worry about painting around your delicate design, which I used to do a lot, but masking fluid is so useful for this. Okay, so next I'm going to go and work here because I tend to smudge um, my works. So I'm gonna work from here and then here. Okay, so now for something really easy, but really fun. I'm going to use a bigger round brush so that I can have more pigment and fluid. Okay, so I'm just going to wet the whole egg. Okay, same technique here, just no design. I'm going to wet the whole egg, wet and wet. Again, you can go over it again to see if it's wet enough. Look at it from an angle and make sure that it's glossy. So if you have a big round brush, then it would really make it easy, or a flat brush to cover the surface. I'm going over back on the areas that I've already gone through because nice thick paper can really absorb a lot of water. It can take a lot of water, so there's no worry that you're gonna add more than it can handle. Okay, so now I'm going to use colors from the Classico palette. So some ultramarine violet, some ultramarine blue. Okay, so let's create a nice mix of colors using the wet on wet. So that's why you need it to be glossy, so that it will create nice bleedings. Okay, so I'm going to start with ultramarine violet. Okay, then you can also dip water if you want it to be extra wet. Now I'm going to go for ultramarine blue. And then also some of the pink from the Moderna. Okay, some of this bright pink. Okay, so I'm really just playing around with it. So this is the nice thing about the wet on wet. It really just gives you a magical, wonderful blend of colors. But if you choose analogous colors, then of course the chances of you not ending up with a muddy mixture is higher. So try to choose colors that are next to each other on the color wheel, and they won't create awful mixtures when you set them against each other. Okay, so that's the most basic that you can start off with when you're trying to create your wet on wet designs. Try to choose colors next to each other. So you can use purple, blue, and pink, or you can use red, orange, yellow, blue, and green, and yellow. So colors like that, they would blend wonderfully, and um, you don't have to worry so much about them turning muddy, because they're next to each other in the color wheel, and they will look well together, even if they end up mixing quite a lot. Okay, so this is like a galaxy-ish egg. So a very detailed egg using masking fluid. And if any of you just joined now and you missed this, we also did a watercolor painting on an actual egg. So this was a brown egg earlier, and I added watercolor ground to it, and then painted some roses and leaves. So this is watercolor. So you can also paint watercolor in egg. So just watch the replay later on to watch the earlier part if you want to see how I made this. Very easy, and you can totally do it. Okay, so for the last egg, okay, so for this last egg, I'm actually going to make this opaque, and then I will use metallic paints. So that's also a nice thing to do with eggs, is to add some glitter. Well, I mean some shimmer of metallics. Okay, so let's see. I have a bluish pinkish. I have my red. So let's do um, some greens. Okay, so let's try. I'm always like this when I bake. I'm like, what to do, what to do. Okay, so let's do some, let's mix some turquoise and phthalo green. Okay, I think that would look nice. Okay, so let's do what do you call this? A gradation. Okay, so let's start from the top. let's start with our turquoise blue. Wait, let me just make sure that I'm getting the right color. Okay, so let's do some turquoise on top. Let's add some pigment to make it darker. Just because remember it will lighten when it dries. So you have to remember that when you're working on your watercolor, so that when you create your mixtures, you're prepared for the lightening. And now I started adding some phthalo green right here. So starting from turquoise, turning phthalo green with a little bit of turquoise, and then transitioning to just phthalo green down here. Hi, Joe. So I hope you guys try painting eggs as well. They can be fun. Of course, it's very fun to paint on actual eggs. And you can do so with watercolor. So you actually get to have watercolor painted eggs. How awesome, right? You can have, you know, more pastel-like eggs. Okay, so I started here, and then meeting here at the middle, and then blending it together. Okay, so again, it doesn't have to be super perfect. As long as you see the gradation, then that's cool. Okay, so if you wanted to have effects, you can drop in color. For example, if you want some blooming going on, you can do that. Okay, so here I have my sort of galaxy egg, then this gradated colored egg, and then I will just use a blow dryer, and then I will add some gold to this. Okay, so pardon the noise, and if you have any questions, ask away. Okay, there we go. And let me just get my metallics. Okay, so I have the Prezioso. Okay, so this is our all metallic paint set. And let me see. As usual, I'm quite partial to gold. I like my golds. Okay, so let me just use a flat brush. Okay, so a small flat brush from the Fine Line collection, so that I can do my details without worrying too much. Okay, so I'm using, let's see, I'll use the more golden color. Okay, so there are several golds in the set, so I'm now going to, I've used this so much, let's go with bronze. So I'm going to use bronze add some detail to my egg right here. Nothing too much because I don't want to have two very detailed eggs side by side that will overwhelm the one egg on the right. So I'm just going to add here on top. Okay, so when I want to cover a certain area, I use flat brushes. And if it's a small area, then a detail flat brush. Okay, so this is bronze. It looks great with the blue and green. And I'm curving the design so that it doesn't go against the natural curve of the egg. So when you do your designs, also try to think about that. So if you add your lines, try to also curve it so that it looks better again with the egg. Instead of just creating one straight line, try to just curve it a little and it will blend beautifully with the egg. Okay, so I'm adding on top and then also adding a smaller line under. So just take your time, and I would twist my paper around just so I can really view the line that I'm working on. Or you can sketch it out if you want to have more control over your work. Okay, so I'll add another line. Maybe a bit thicker one, just slightly, not too much. Again, I don't want this to be too detailed and take away from this egg. Okay, and I'm going to do the same here at the bottom. Okay, I'm going to add my bronze bottom. So just take your time. So this is really a fun time to experiment, to explore, try out different techniques, create different beautiful eggs. Okay, just adding another layer. So that's the nice thing about these metallics is you can layer them on top of other colors, and they're very pigmented that they can handle it. You can, they really cover the color under if you need it. And yet you can also use this with a lot of water and just maybe add a kind of shimmer over your previous color. So it's very flexible. It's very versatile that way. So if you want it really thick, it can go thick. If you want it just a shimmer, it can also do that. So it's also fun to include some metallics when you're painting. Okay, and similar to the one on top, another thicker one here. So if you like, you can actually create a more textured center if you want. Or you can create all your eggs very detailed. You can also do that if you want. Here I'm just showing you the different kinds of eggs that I would make if I would create lots of eggs for Easter. I would do this when I was young and send cards to relatives, to loved ones. Okay, so there we have our 3 eggs. I can maybe add something at the center if I want. Let's add some dots so that it's not too empty, but it still won't be too detailed. Okay, so let's add some gold dots circling around. Okay, so I like to use gold for this because it really complements the, well, I think, well, this is bronze, but kind of looks goldish as well. It goes well with the blue and green. Okay, so there you have it. Again, you can always add more details if you want. You can create more complicated designs, up to you. But for now, let's remove this. Okay, so you can just use your finger. You can already peel it off, or you can use an eraser. But I find that using my finger is already enough. So just peel the red. If you're already happy with it, if you're not going to add any more layers, just make sure you're already done before you do this. Okay, and if you'd like the design of this egg at the center, I'll sketch it out digitally and I'll share it to you guys tomorrow. So just watch out for my post here on the event. And I also share it when I share the replay. Okay, so just peel it with your finger. So you won't really have any trouble if you use good paper. If you maybe used cheaper paper, try to do this more gently and carefully because it might tear the paper. But I find that with nice thick paper, I haven't had any tearing experience, so thankfully. Okay, so just keep peeling. I actually like that it's not too straight, the edges makes it look more organic. Gives it a more like hand painted feel. So this is the nice thing about masking fluid. You can really get to create very, very complicated detailed designs and just cover it with masking fluid, and you get to keep that without any problems. So I like to use this for sharp highlights, for example on the eyes or on metallic surfaces that have really sharp highlights. But otherwise, I just paint around the white of the paper. But for sharp highlights, this is very useful. Okay, so these are my 3 eggs, my very detailed egg, my galaxy egg, and then my gradiated colored egg with some metallics. So if I tilt it like this, you can see the metallic sheen. It's really awesome. I'll probably add more here. But these are my 3 eggs that I like to, 3 kinds of techniques that I like to use for painting Easter eggs. All right, so I hope you guys, oh, and I forgot this one, the actual egg with the actual watercolor painting on it as well. Okay, so I'm going to flip back to my face now. Okay, thank you guys. Okay, it's so zoomed in. All right, let's zoom out. Okay, so thank you guys for joining me. Here are my eggs. I just made 3. I hope you try it out for yourself. And this one. If you missed this one, just rewind once it's over. There will be a replay. There's always a replay. So just go back to the start, and basically it's just adding watercolor ground to your egg. So the surface of the egg is perfect because you don't have to abrade the surface to make it rough before you put your watercolor ground on. Because if your surface is, for example, glass, you would need to sand it to abrade it before you use your watercolor ground on it. Okay, so that's it for today, and I hope you try this out in time for Easter, and have a good day. Bye, guys.